This video is essentially about setting up the references, the reference images and the camera positions and the camera focal length in order to do the mesh construction. But we see the first issue we need to fix is the proportion of the windmill blades that are stick before the actual sails start. So again, go into edit mode and move the locations of the vertices. Now we're going to make the windmill point in the y direction, which is more conventional, so any symmetry will be about the y-axis or in the x direction. So we've got a series. I'm going to use 4 reference images, and the first thing we can see is that the blades actually seem to tilt, but it's hard to judge this because of the perspective, and that's something we're going to run into problems. We look at one of the images and we can get in the image data information about the camera, and it says the focal length was 4.3, but if we use that in the settings in Blender, it's far too small. So you'll see I've put in a value of 20 as a guesstimate. So this is in the camera properties. It's got a focal length and I put in 20. In actual fact, it's worth spending time before you go through this process. You'll probably find somebody has put the focal length equivalent for a 35mm photo sensor, and that's the figure that you want. But if you can't find it, you have to go through this trial and error process that I'm going through now. So I've selected the images, I add them as a reference image, and then I make them a child of the camera. And you see, as you move the camera, if you press shift and backtick, you can then move the camera with the mouse and with the WASD gameplay camera walk options. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to move any of the mesh components that we create from their symmetry about the x-axis. We're going to move the camera each time. And you'll see down on the bottom, I'm adding a keyframe to the camera. So select the camera and press I in the 3D viewport, and then select position and rotation for the camera. And for each keyframe, we can click on move to the keyframe. The camera will move to that location, and then we can switch on and off the different reference images that we can see. So we look at image 1 on keyframe 1, image 2 on keyframe 2, the references. I started off calling them reference 0, reference 1, but I'll change them. Now we see there's a problem getting the perspective of the windmill sails to match. So we've put the cylindrical part of the windmill support in, and we can line that up quite nicely, but it's really difficult to get the sails to line up. They're foreshortened and the angle seems wrong. So just duplicate the wall section and shrink it to make it into the top wooden tiled part. And again, just simple mesh. So we're doing this, and we're going to add a cube in order to try to get some idea of the perspective. So it looks to line up relatively well from this view, but we can see the front of the windmill should be visible from this camera position, so we need to move the camera, and when we do that we see the perspective has started to look a bit awry and it's sloping too much. we'll rough out the shape. Basically, we're making a rough shape here in order to be able to move the camera positions to eventually get the camera focal length correct, to be able to position the reference images from the camera positions, to be able to move the vertices nicely. See, there's some of these edges are not straight there, which we'll have to fix later. Finally, I've come to the conclusion, actually I googled, but I could have come to the conclusion through this process that the focal length equivalent for a 35mm sensor is 27mm. So finally, making the focal length 27, I now move the camera. And notice, after I've moved the camera with the walk navigation, I then go and check the Z position to move it 1.5 metres above the ground, which was about the height that I would have been holding the camera. So you need to alternate between moving the camera to get the view to match up with the model you've made, and then go and check the height above the ground of the camera and correct that, and then go backwards and forwards. And remember, each time you've got the camera set up in the right position to record the rotation and position on the correct keyframe, otherwise you'll be very annoyed. You go back and everything will have moved. So now we've sorted out the perspective for the reference images, we can go ahead and correct the existing mesh and add the other details.